The scorching sun of South Dakota beat down on the panoramic window of the conference room on the 30th floor of the Crystal Tower in downtown Sioux Falls. 12 men in impeccable suits and one woman in a lead-gray blazer sat around the massive oval table made of fine wood. The air conditioning kept the room at a perfect temperature, a stark contrast to the sweltering heat outside, where the thermometer read 100 degrees Fahrenheit. William Thompson, CEO of Midwest Agricultural Solutions, adjusted his navy blue tie as he studied the charts projected on the screen. His angular face and impassive expression couldn't hide his impatience. "Gentlemen, we're wasting time with bureaucratic details. We need a new supplier immediately," he said, tapping the table with his custom gold pen. "The board is pushing for results, and all you're giving me are problems instead of solutions." Jeffrey Parker, the CFO, cleared his throat. "William, we can't ignore the numbers. Local producers can't meet our demand at the price we're willing to pay." "Then find someone who can," William shot back, running a hand through his perfectly trimmed salt and pepper hair. "Or should I remind everyone that our competitors at East Plains Agro are eyeing the same lands we are?" The tension in the room was palpable when Samantha Miller, the only woman present and the director of acquisitions, broke the awkward silence. "There's a local producer who controls a large portion of the Southern Plains region. His name is Robert Mendez. He's an American who became a naturalized citizen over 20 years ago. He inherited the land from his father-in-law and turned a modest property into one of the largest grain producers in the state." "And why haven't I heard of him?" William asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because he avoids the spotlight and works exclusively with local cooperatives. He doesn't deal with multinationals on principle," Samantha replied, adjusting her discreetly framed glasses. "But his land is exactly what we need, and with the prolonged drought this year, even he must be feeling the financial pressure." "Set up a meeting," William ordered with a calculated smile. "Everyone has their price. It's just a matter of adding enough zeros to the check." 2 days later, at the same time, the conference room was prepared to receive the mysterious farmer. A sophisticated coffee table had been set up in the corner, complete with imported delicacies and gourmet coffee grown in the Rocky Mountains. William glanced at his wristwatch for the third time in 5 minutes. He's late. 15 minutes of tolerance is standard in negotiations, Samantha reminded him, not looking up from her tablet. At that moment, the secretary opened the door to announce the guest's arrival. But the figure who entered the room made everyone freeze in their seats. A man in his 60s, wearing faded jeans, a plaid shirt, and time-worn leather boots, walked in with steady steps. His calloused hands and sun-tanned skin betrayed years of labor under the sun. A straw hat hung from his back, secured by a cord. "Is Mr. Mendez running late?" William asked the secretary, unable to hide his disdain. The simple man stopped in the middle of the room, his calm gaze sweeping over each face present. "There won't be any delay," he replied in a deep, measured voice. "I'm Robert Mendez." The silence that followed was broken by a muffled laugh from one of the executives at the far end of the table. William shot an irritated glance at his colleague and, forcing a smile, stood to greet the visitor. "Mr. Mendez, forgive our confusion. We were expecting." "Someone like you?" Robert finished, his tone unchanged. "I understand perfectly." Samantha quickly stood and gestured to a chair. "Please, Mr. Mendez, have a seat. We appreciate your presence." Robert placed his hat on the table and sat down, crossing his legs with ease. His blue eyes, contrasting with his sun-weathered skin, examined every detail of the room. "Let's get straight to the point, Mr. Mendez," William began, regaining his composure. "Midwest Agricultural Solutions is interested in establishing an exclusive partnership with suppliers in your region. Your properties come highly recommended, and we'd like to discuss terms and conditions." Robert remained silent for a few seconds, as if weighing each word. "Mr. Thompson, before we talk business, I'd like to better understand what your group plans to do with our land and our produce." William exchanged nervous glances with Jeffrey. "Well, as you may know, we're a results-driven company. We aim to optimize production, implement modern techniques, and naturally increase profitability." "And what about the local workers, the families who depend on the land?" The preservation of the Southern Plains ecosystem? Robert leaned forward. Do those factors play into your results-driven equation? An uncomfortable silence filled the room. William swallowed hard, realizing he had completely underestimated this simple-looking man. Mr. Mendez, Samantha interjected, perhaps we should show you our sustainability plan and our commitment to local communities. We have projects that... Ms. Miller, Robert interrupted, surprising her by knowing her name. I appreciate the effort, but I didn't come here to hear polished corporate presentations. I came to decide if you're the kind of people I want to do business with. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. Suddenly, the executives were no longer in control. The man in simple clothes was now steering the conversation. And how do you plan to evaluate that, Mr. Mendez? William challenged, visibly annoyed. Robert smiled for the first time since entering the room. I've been evaluating it, Mr. Thompson, since the moment I walked in. He stood, picking up his hat. I have a different proposal. Before any negotiations, I'd like to invite you all to see my land, tomorrow at sunrise. The executives exchanged stunned glances. Is that really necessary? Jeffrey asked, nervously adjusting his glasses. Absolutely indispensable, Robert replied, heading for the door. I'm not just selling grain and cattle, Mr. Parker. I'm selling the result of decades of work, respect for the land and the people who depend on it. If you want my product, you need to understand where it comes from. Before leaving, Robert turned one last time. Oh, and leave the suits at home. Where we're going, they'll be useless. The alarm clock woke William at 4 a.m., pulling him from his sleep in the luxurious hotel room. Grumbling, he got up and faced the new pair of jeans and cotton shirt he had bought specifically for this occasion. He felt ridiculous just thinking about wearing them. This is absurd, he muttered to himself as he dressed. I'm the CEO of a billion-dollar company, not some rural safari tourist. Half an hour later, in the hotel lobby, he met his team. Jeffrey looked especially uncomfortable in casual clothes, while Samantha seemed surprisingly at ease in cargo pants and hiking boots. Good morning, boss, she greeted with a restrained smile. Sleep well? Don't start, Miller, William snapped, irritated. Let's get this charade over with. At exactly 5 a.m., a dusty pickup truck pulled up in front of the hotel. Robert Mendez was at the wheel, smiling as he saw the clearly out-of-place executives. Good morning, everyone, he greeted, opening the door. I hope you're ready for a real day. The group piled into two trucks. William, Samantha, and Jeffrey rode with Robert, while the other executives followed in a second vehicle driven by a young man who introduced himself as Kevin, Robert's son. As they left the city behind, the asphalt gave way to dirt roads. The urban landscape gradually gave way to vast plains of intense green, dotted with the twisted trees typical of the American prairie. We're approaching my slice of heaven, Robert announced after nearly an hour of driving. You can already see the main house of Horizon Farm. In the distance, a simple yet imposing structure began to take shape. It was a two-story colonial-style house surrounded by well-kept gardens and century-old trees. Nearby, modern agricultural facilities contrasted with the traditional architecture. When they finally stopped in front of the main house, they were greeted by an elegant woman with graying hair pulled back into a simple bun. Sarah, my wife. Robert introduced with evident pride. The real force behind all this. Sarah Mendez greeted the visitors with a firm handshake and a warm smile that didn't quite match her assessing gaze. Welcome to our home, she said, her slight American accent still noticeable after decades in the US. Breakfast is served. I imagine you're hungry after the trip. On the wide porch that wrapped around the house, a table was set with an array of homemade foods, freshly baked bread, fresh fruit, artisanal cheeses, cakes, and a steaming pot of coffee grown and roasted right on the farm. As they ate, Robert began to tell his story. I came to the US almost 30 years ago as a researcher in sustainable agriculture. I met Sarah, who was conducting a study on prairie biodiversity, and I fell in love with her and with this land. His eyes sparkled as he spoke, alternating his gaze between the landscape and his wife's face. Sarah's father was a small local producer. When he passed away, he left us this piece of land, at the time less than a tenth of what we have now. Many thought we'd fail, that two Americans with degrees but little practical experience wouldn't survive the first drought season. Sarah added, pouring more coffee for Jeffrey. Those were hard years. We even went hungry at times. But we learned from the locals, people who know this land like the back of their hands. We were humble enough to listen and adapt modern techniques to traditional knowledge. And how did you expand so much? Samantha asked, genuinely interested. Robert exchanged a meaningful look with his wife before answering. When we arrived, many local producers were in debt and being pressured by big companies like yours to sell their land for pennies. William shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Instead of competing with them, we proposed a cooperative. We shared resources, knowledge, and infrastructure. When we got our first significant loan, we bought equipment that benefited everyone, not just our production. Is that why you control so much land now? Jeffrey asked, adjusting his glasses. Sarah smiled enigmatically. We don't control any land, Mr. Parker. Each cooperative member maintains autonomy over their property. What we share is a production system and common values. After breakfast, Robert invited them on a tour of the property. In vehicles adapted to the rough terrain, they passed through soybean and cornfields, as well as areas of sustainable pasture. At each stop, Robert explained innovative cultivation techniques that combined high productivity with environmental preservation. These wetlands you're seeing are vital to the local ecosystem, he explained, pointing to a marshy area where colorful birds flew overhead. Many producers drain these areas to increase cultivable land, but within a few years the soil becomes infertile. William, despite his initial resistance, began to show interest in the explanations. How much do you produce per acre with these? Limitations, Robert smiled. About 15% above the national average, Mr. Thompson, with 22% lower production costs. The executives exchanged incredulous looks. The last stop was a large barn where dozens of workers operated modern machines that processed and packaged grain. Every cooperative member has access to this facility, Kevin explained, who had joined the group. This eliminates middlemen and increases our profit margin. An elderly man, his skin wrinkled by the sun and a wide smile missing a few teeth, approached the group. He wore simple work clothes and carried a straw hat in his hands. This is Antonio, Robert introduced, putting an arm around the old man's shoulders with evident respect. He was my first teacher in real agriculture, not the kind from books. His family has been farming this land for 5 generations. Antonio shook hands with each visitor, his grip surprisingly strong for his advanced age. Mr. Robert and Mrs. Sarah saved many families here, he said in heavily accented English. When the banks and big companies wanted to swallow us up, they reached out. On the way back to the main house, they passed a simple but well-equipped rural school where children of various ages studied. A health clinic operated in the adjacent building. We built this with part of the cooperative's profits, Sarah explained. Education and health are basic rights, not privileges. Our workers aren't resources, they're people. During lunch, served under huge oak trees in the garden of the main house, the initial tension had largely dissipated. Even William seemed more relaxed, having traded his defensive posture for genuine interest. I must admit, Mr. Mendes, he commented after tasting a succulent dish of local fish prepared with herbs from the region, your methods are impressive. Robert nodded in acknowledgement. We're not against progress or profits, Mr. Thompson. We just believe both should come with respect for the land and the people. And that's why you've never negotiated with big corporations before? Samantha asked. Robert set down his utensils and looked at each executive for a moment before answering. I tried once, 15 years ago. The company promised to maintain our principles and practices. 6 months after the acquisition, they fired 80% of the local workers and introduced banned pesticides that contaminated the groundwater. 3 children in the community developed severe respiratory problems. A heavy silence fell over the table. Since then, he continued, we only negotiate with partners who prove their commitment to our values, not just with pretty words in boardrooms. William then asked the question everyone had been avoiding. "And us? Did we pass your test?" Robert's enigmatic smile offered no immediate answer. Back in the conference room of the Crystal Tower, 3 days after the visit to Horizon Farm, the atmosphere was completely different. The executives, still impacted by what they had witnessed, chatted animatedly before the formal meeting with Robert Mendez began. "Did you see that irrigation system? It saves 40% of water and still increases productivity," commented one of the operations directors. "And the training program for the workers' children? Brilliant. They keep skilled labor without needing to look elsewhere," added another. Samantha observed the change in behavior with a discreet smile. Even Jeffrey, always so formal and resistant to innovation, had spent the previous day researching sustainable farming techniques. William entered the room last, surprising everyone by leaving his suit jacket behind. He carried only a leather briefcase and a thoughtful expression he rarely displayed. "Gentlemen, let's begin," he announced, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Robert Mendez will be here in 15 minutes, and we need to align the proposal." Jeffrey presented a slide with carefully calculated numbers. "Based on what we saw, I've prepared an initial offer. Considering the quality of production and the existing infrastructure, we can offer 22% above market value." William shook his head thoughtfully. "It's not about money. At least, not just about money." Everyone stared at him, surprised. William Thompson, known for his obsession with profits and margins, talking as if values beyond the financial mattered. "Mendez won't negotiate if we don't demonstrate commitment to the methodology he's built," William continued. "Samantha, how's the plan we discussed?" The director of acquisitions stood, projecting a new document on the screen. "This is my proposal. Instead of acquiring the land or forcing exclusivity, I suggest a strategic partnership. We maintain the cooperative's autonomy, but offer our logistics infrastructure and access to international markets. In return, we become their primary buyers." "What about the sustainable methods?" asked one of the executives. "Not only do we maintain them, but I propose expanding them," Samantha replied, moving to the next slide. "We can create a research institute in partnership with the cooperative, focused on large-scale sustainable agriculture." The door opened, interrupting the presentation. Robert Mendez entered, but he wasn't alone. Beside him, a woman in her early 30s carried a briefcase and a tablet. Her features blended Robert's and Sarah's, but her professional demeanor and analytical gaze revealed a personality all her own. "Good morning, everyone," Robert greeted. "This is my daughter, Emily Mendez. In addition to holding a PhD in agronomy from the University of Chicago, she's the one really running our operations these days." Emily shook hands with everyone firmly. "My father insists on maintaining the image of a simple farmer," she said with a smile, revealing a perfect American accent. "In reality, he spends more time giving lectures at universities around the world than driving tractors these days." William gestured to the seats of honor at the table for the two guests. "Ms. Mendez, we didn't know you'd be joining us." "Emily, please," she corrected. "And that was part of the plan. My father wanted to see how you'd react to him without knowing who we really are." The executives exchanged confused glances. "What do you mean, who we really are?" Jeffrey asked. Robert smiled, settling into his chair. "Before we were farmers, we were scientists, Mr. Parker. Sarah and I came to the U.S. to research, not to farm. When we decided to stay, we turned the small property we inherited into a living laboratory," Emily added, opening her tablet. "The Horizon Cooperative isn't just a group of producers. It's one of the largest applied research centers in agroecology in the Western Hemisphere, with partnerships at 17 universities across 4 continents. She projected images of modern facilities and laboratories hidden behind the rustic facade they had visited. "That rural school you saw, it trains agricultural technicians specialized in sustainable practices. The clinic? It conducts one of the largest studies in the world on the impact of pesticides on human health." William and the other executives listened in astonishment. They had been completely misled by their initial assumptions. "But why all the theatrics?" William asked, somewhat irritated. Why not reveal all this from the start? Robert leaned forward, his intense gaze fixed on William. Because I wanted to see if you could see value beyond the surface. If you could respect a simple man with mud on his boots, perhaps you could respect the principles we've built. And? Did we pass the test? Samantha asked. Emily consulted her notes. Partially, we were impressed by the change in attitude after the visit, but we still have some concerns. William surprised everyone by standing up. Before we continue, I'd like to say something. He took a deep breath as if the words were difficult to say. I underestimated Mr. Mendez. I underestimated what you've built, and more importantly, I underestimated the impact practices like yours can have on business. His team members stared at him, dumbfounded. William Thompson admitting a mistake. I'm not just interested in a business partnership, he continued. I want to learn from you. I want to transform Midwest Agricultural Solutions into a leader in sustainable practices, not just to improve our image, but because I've seen with my own eyes that it's the smartest path forward. Robert and Emily exchanged glances. Those are fine words, Mr. Thompson, Robert said, but we've heard promises before. That's why I didn't come. With promises, but with this. William pushed a document across the table. It was a pre-signed contract detailing a partnership on the terms Samantha had mentioned, with one crucial addition. Robert, Sarah, and Emily would be appointed to the advisory board of Midwest Agricultural Solutions with the power to veto any decision that violated sustainability principles. This is unexpected, Emily admitted, flipping through the contract carefully. What do you really want, William? Robert asked, using the CEO's first name for the first time. William sat back down, his expression more open and honest than any of his employees had ever seen. The truth, I'm tired. Tired of competing just for numbers, of watching competitors destroy the future for immediate profits. When I saw your operation, I realized there's another way. A way that's not only ethical, but also profitable in the long run. Emily studied William with an analytical gaze. And your shareholders, did the board approve this? William smiled. I'm the majority shareholder, and I convinced the board by showing them not just the profit projections for the coming years, but also the added value that a true sustainable partnership would bring. In today's world, that's worth more than a few percentage points of immediate margin. Robert extended his hand. I'm not ready to sign yet, William, but I'm ready to keep talking, on one condition. What's that? At the next meeting, come in boots. I want to show you the research fields you didn't see the first time. William smiled, shaking the offered hand. Deal, though I might need new boots. The ones I bought for the visit weren't exactly up to the task. Everyone laughed, breaking the tension. What had started as a simple acquisition negotiation had now transformed into something much larger, a quiet revolution that could forever change the agricultural industry. 6 months later, the first harvest produced under the new partnership hit the market with the Sustainable Horizon label, immediately becoming a global success story in regenerative agriculture. William, now often seen in dusty boots and rolled-up sleeves, had become the unlikely spokesperson for a new business model that proved day by day that profit and socio-environmental responsibility were not mutually exclusive. And Robert Mendez, the man who had walked into that conference room months earlier underestimated, was now the guest of honor at lectures in the world's top business schools, always beginning his speeches the same way. Never judge a book by its cover, or a farmer by his muddy boots. As the partnership solidified, Emily Mendez took on an increasingly important role both in the cooperative and at Midwest Agricultural Solutions. Her innovative vision and technical expertise brought new dimensions to the project, attracting international attention. You know what I've learned from all this? William commented during an international agriculture fair in Berlin, where the Horizon Midwest Partnership had been awarded Initiative of the Year. That sometimes you need to lose to truly win. Robert, standing beside him, smiled. And I've learned that some corporate wolves can really change their stripes, he replied, raising his glass in a toast. In the audience, Samantha watched proudly. She had been promoted to Vice President of Sustainability and Innovation, a position created specifically to lead the company's new direction. Jeffrey, initially the most skeptical, now conducted workshops for executives from other corporations on transitioning to sustainable models. Back in the US, on the land where it all began, Sarah Mendez showed a group of university students the new experimental fields. "True wealth is here," she said, holding a handful of dark, fertile soil. "Not in bank accounts or titles. When we understand that, everything changes." At the cooperative's headquarters, a framed photo captured the perfect contrast of the story. On one side, Robert in his simple work clothes. On the other, William, in an impeccable suit. In the center, a handshake that symbolized not just a business deal, but a quiet revolution beginning to spread through the agricultural industry. And when asked by journalists about the secret to his success, Robert always answered with the same simple phrase that carried the essence of his journey. True value is never on the surface. It's in the roots deep and unseen that sustain everything we see. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert and William has touched your hearts and perhaps changed how you see the world of business and agriculture. To continue this journey of reflection on values and appearances, we've prepared a special playlist of equally moving and transformative stories. Find it right here by clicking on the left side of the screen. If this narrative stirred something in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give that special like. That makes all the difference. Every day we bring new stories exploring the complexities of American life and its fascinating characters. The next episode might be exactly what you needed to hear today. Leave in the comments what your favorite moment of Robert Mendez's story was. Was it his triumphant entrance into the boardroom, the revelation of his true identity, or perhaps William Thompson's surprising transformation? We're eager to hear your thoughts.